our friend Mike Lindell has a passion to help everyone get the best sleep of your life. Mike created the new Giza Dream bed sheets. They're amazing. I use them. I love them. You will receive 2 for one low price plus free shipping. Call 1-800-685-7221. Use the promo code Carter. Thanks for joining the Sara Carter Show. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Also, make sure to follow me on Twitter, Facebook, Rumble, and Parler. Parler is back. At least we can get on it some of the time. I'm sure they're going to work out all the kinks, but you guys, we need something. We need something else. We need Parler. We need to combat YouTube and Twitter and Facebook censorship, right? So let's all get on Parler. Get all those links at saracarter.com. That's saracarter.com. And while you are there, please sign up for our email list. This way, you will never be shadow banned, right? You will never be censored because we will get those emails directly to you with all of our latest stories and our latest interviews. Now, this is great because today I have Congressman Michael Waltz on from the 6th District of Florida. I think you know him, former Green Beret, an amazing man. He's sitting on so many important committees in Congress right now. And he just wrote this brilliant opinion editorial at the Washington Examiner, where I used to work. He wrote this brilliant editorial on why we should boycott. I know you hate the word boycott because it's the Olympics, right? The 2022 Olympics in Beijing. It's very important that you read this, that you understand what is happening here and why so many members of Congress, along with Congressman Waltz, believe this is important. You've got cancel culture Nike, cancel culture NBC, all these other groups of people that want to cancel every American out for saying anything. But they don't want to cancel or boycott the Olympics where people, where the Uyghurs are being shipped off on these train carts and put in what they call re-education camps where women are being raped and abused, where they're sterilizing the Uyghur women. And the Chinese Communist Party, by the way, which has poisoned our entire world. I'm going to be talking about that. And I am going to be talking about the fact that our government's expansion of powers, these domestic powers, I'm also going to talk a little bit about space. I always talk about space, especially when I have someone on the space committee, which Congressman Waltz is on. So we're going to bring up those issues of space and the importance of studying these unidentified flying phenomena and what's going on Capitol Hill with that. But I'm also going to talk to you about the expansion of powers and how dangerous things are right now in the United States as far as allowing our intelligence apparatus, as well as our Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, these expansive powers to spy on Americans. But first, today's podcast is sponsored by the Association of Mature American Citizens. I talk about them all the time. They are the greatest organization, one that stands for freedom, one that stands for liberty, right? That's why they sponsor our show. They are the only conservative alternative to AARP. Go to amac.us/Carter. That's amac.us/Carter. Let's get into the expansion of powers. And the reason I'm going to talk to you about this is because I have been on numerous calls with sources over the past several weeks, and I'm letting you in on this first, my podcast audience, because I care so much about you. I feel like I'm with you so many times during the week, and it's the one place where honestly, I know if you're listening to the show, you're going to hear me out because you care about these subjects. Because it's not just like a couple of minutes on TV on Fox News, right? Where maybe I only get like 30 seconds to talk. But here we can go in depth. Here we can share these stories together and you can be on this journey with me. And you need to be on this journey with me. You really need to. You have to understand what's going on here. We have never seen what's happening in the United States in its history ever. And I'm talking about the expansion of powers in the U.S., where the United States government, the capability to gather all kinds of intelligence on its citizens, is utilizing that to basically investigate what some are calling Nancy Pelosi, former CIA Director John Brennan, and others, domestic terrorists, where they are literally targeting Americans and calling American citizens domestic terrorists. They've never given us any proof that there's these domestic terrorist organizations like these massive ones. We know that there are bad apples everywhere. And we understand that there are people that are upset with the government and that are going, and some are operating like terrorists, I would say, or, but domestically inside the country. But we are not seeing what they are talking about. They want to flip everything upside down on its head. They basically want to take laws and rules and authorities that the intelligence community used basically on foreign adversaries and use those tools, weaponize those tools against the American public. And I want you to think about this. It's all based on a fear that they have not explained to us. You look at Washington, D.C., and this is my hometown now. This is where I live. I mean, I live very close in Northern Virginia. Washington, D.C. is my home. I go there to cover stories, and it looks like a militarized zone. We have our wonderful National Guard units who did not expect to be there. They're still there, not even knowing why they're there. I mean, Congressman Matt Waltz is going to talk about that on the show because he's in the National Guard, and I think he's an authority that can talk about this. And you have 12-foot high fencing for miles around the Capitol, right? With their own specific gate. I mean, this type of fencing, it's like held in. You could see where they dug deep and they put concrete to hold the fence in. It's 12 feet high. It's got rebarb on the top. It's razor wire, Constantina razor wire. It's so horrific. You don't even want to go near that razor wire. It is dangerous. It will slice you and dice you. It's bigger than the forward operating bases in Afghanistan. I want you to think about this. I have been to combat outposts in Afghanistan and forward operating bases in Afghanistan, especially when they first construct them, that don't even have as much around them as this wall, the wall of Nancy, has around the Capitol building on Capitol Hill. That's pretty scary. Because when I was in Afghanistan, even when I was at FOB Salerno, Forward Operating Base Salerno, I could literally chuck the cookies. I would get these cookies, Famous Amos cookies. Remember those little bags? I loved those. Well, they had them in Salerno, and I'm just going to take you there for a minute. And there was a little boy from the village in this, near this combat outpost that I loved so much. And he called himself Michael Jackson. I swear. Every time I asked him what his name was, I'm pretty sure it was not Michael Jackson, but he would say his name was Michael Jackson. And he and his little brothers, I'm assuming they were his brothers. They all kind of looked the same. They were so adorable. And they would always play around the base. And when they'd see me, they'd want me to chuck the cookies, because I started that, over the fence line. And sometimes I would get a soldier to help me, and we would just throw the cookies up and over the fence line. And Michael Jackson would grab the cookies and the other kids that were with him. But these wires are, I mean, I could literally do that. I could not do that here. That's just to give you an idea. I could not throw the cookies. I'm sure they would not make it over this fence. That's how high this is. So I want you to think about that. I'm going to play you a clip. And this is Joe Biden, President Biden, at the inauguration speech, addressing the inauguration speech, mind you. I want to remind you of this, addressing this idea of the rise of white supremacy and domestic terrorism in the United States.
Dream of justice for all will be deferred no longer. A cry for survival comes from the planet itself, a cry that can't be any more desperate or any more clear. And now, a rise of political extremism, white supremacy, domestic terrorism that we must confront and we will defeat. To overcome these challenges, to restore the soul and secure the future of America, requires so much more than words. It requires the most elusive of all things in a democracy: unity. Unity.
It is nothing about unity. That is a lie. It is about fear. And what does fear allow governments to do? Fear allows government to expand its power. Fear allows government to enter into your home without you knowing, to listen in on you on your Alexa or whatever, technology you have in your house, in your television set, smart TVs, your cell phones. It allows the government to look at your emails, to collect your data, to store your data for future use. And all of this is based on the assumption that the government that you are allowing to do this to protect you from some sort of really untangible threat is going to always be a good government. That this government is always going to operate with honesty and on principle and never cross those lines. It's already crossed those lines, folks. I've told you this on the show. I've shared with you, even on our last podcast, how in 1978, when we passed the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, the courts, when those were established in 1978, it was because Senator Frank Church held the Church hearings because the NSA was already spying, right, on Americans, collecting data. That was in 1978. What do you think is happening now? And I need you to ask yourself this question. And I want to ask the FBI, by the way, I'm going to ask the FBI a number of questions, but I need to ask yourself this question. Are you really terrified that there is this massive white supremacist army in the United States that's ready to overthrow the government? Is that what they're saying? Who is this group? What are they using to communicate with? Where are they rising to power? Where are they? I haven't seen them. I saw a situation at the Capitol, which, by the way, now we know was not all the correct stories that were coming out of there. The reason why the police officer died, other things that are coming out now that were actually twisted and not truthfully told at the beginning. I saw a guy with that crazy guy, the organic guy with the horns on his head. I can't remember the name off the top of my head right now, but he had big horns on his head. Remember that guy, the Viking? And, all this craziness that was happening. And of course, the horrible loss of life. We see that happen in protests and riots all the time. But where is the army that they talk about, that they need so desperately so that they can spy on us? Where's that army, Nancy? Answer my questions. Answer the questions, House Speaker Pelosi, Senator Schumer, Adam Schiff on the Intelligence Committee and others. Where do you get these authorities? Where are they getting these authorities? Are you guys to allow the FBI to have the Biden administration contact the Director of National Intelligence offices to expand those powers to spy on Americans? Domestic spying, folks. I want you to think about what that does to a country. What kind of country do we live in? When we are spying on our own people, when we are collecting information, it is the most powerful weapon on planet Earth. In the history of histories and until the end of time, the most powerful weapon we will have is information. Believe it. It's more so than tools, specific tools, guns, bombs, missiles. No, in the end, it's about information and how you can control a society. So here's my questions, and I'm going to be bringing Mike Waltz on just shortly, Congressman Waltz, to talk about this. But what kind of authority did the FBI have? And let's play this clip from Tucker Carlson right after this, Rich. But I want to talk to you about what kind of authority did the FBI give or have to be able to collect all that data. Remember, Bank of America was sharing all the data on January 6th of all the people that were in that specific area. There were a lot of Americans there. I was one of them that were not participating in any riot, that didn't go into the Capitol, that didn't even know that was happening. I mean, I was there in the morning and people were just together. They were kind. I didn't see any rioting. I didn't see it. So all this data that Bank of America shared, I thought Tucker Carlson did a brilliant job on his show of showing that. And this is from Fox News. I want you to listen to what Tucker Carlson had to say about this.
How are they hunting these extremists they keep telling us about, but will not describe? We now know part of the answer to that question. This show has obtained exclusively evidence that Bank of America, the second largest bank in the country with more than 60 million customers, is actively but secretly engaged in the hunt for extremists in cooperation with the government. Bank of America is, without the knowledge or the consent of its customers, sharing private information with federal law enforcement agencies. Bank of America effectively is acting as an intelligence agency, but they're not telling you about it. In the days after the January 6th riot at the Capitol, Bank of America went through its own customers' financial and transaction records, a lot of them. Now, these were the private records of Americans who had committed no crime. People who, as far as we know, had absolutely nothing to do with what happened at the Capitol on January 6th. But at the request of federal investigators, Bank of America searched its databases looking for people who fit a specific profile. Here's what that profile was, and we are quoting. Customers confirmed as transacting, either through bank account, debit card, or credit card, purchases in Washington, D.C. between January 5th and January 6th. Number 2, purchases made for hotels, Airbnb, RSVPs in Washington, Virginia, or Maryland after January 6th. Number 3, any purchase of weapons or at a weapons-related merchant between January 7th and their upcoming suspected stay in the D.C. area around Inauguration Day. And 4, airline-related purchases since January 6th.
I'm not a Bank of America customer, just so you all know. But what other banks? Maybe, Tucker just got the one bank, right? But maybe they were collecting data from all the banks, were they? I'm asking the FBI this right now here on the podcast. I wonder who at the FBI, and I, by the way, sent an email to the FBI asking to answer those questions. Were there other banks involved in giving data on Americans that were there on January 6th? And here's another good question. Did they collect this same data when the riots broke out at the White House, when President Trump was there last summer? Do you remember that? And the rioters were trying to riot right around the White House, and then they set fire to the church there. And were they collecting that same amount of data then? Huh? Is it all equal? What about in Portland? Was the FBI collecting data on everyone there too? I just want to know. All things being equal, I mean, how are we determining who we're spying on, right? How are we determining that? And I want to know the answers to that. And I sent that to the FBI. So I think that's very, very important. I think that the FBI, we deserve an answer to that. And then I think we also deserve an answer as to what's going on in our country when the Biden administration, for example, asked the DNI for information on Americans, because the DNI is supposed to be dealing with foreign adversaries. And so is the CIA, and a lot of our intelligence apparatus is based on, okay, get the information if it deals with a foreign adversary. If there's somebody here in the United States actually connected to somebody overseas, then you can collect that information. You cannot spy on Americans. You cannot trample the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution. You just can't do it. It's really, really frightening to think of where we're going. And this is why I'm so excited to have Congressman Michael Waltz on. He's a friend. I've known him before he went to Congress. He comes to us from the great free state of Florida, which, Governor DeSantis is incredible with. He's a combat decorated Green Beret. He's a former White House and Pentagon policy advisor, a small business owner. He's a great father. He can talk about all of these issues. I want to tell you, Michael was a person I would go to quite often to talk about what I was witnessing in Afghanistan, what I saw in Iraq. He's somebody who has a world of experience when it comes to dealing with terrorism as well, and advising U.S. presidents. Now he's also serving on the Committee for Space, which is so important because, as you all know, I bring on quite a few people to discuss what is our future like? What is the future for Space Force? How do we handle, right, all of these new issues on the cusp of, I guess it's almost like we're at the cusp of some of the greatest changes in human history. And we're also dealing with so much here. He is a warrior diplomat. He wrote the story, a book called Warrior Diplomat, A Green Beret's Battles from Washington to Afghanistan. My good friend, Michael Waltz. Congressman Waltz, welcome so much to the Sara Carter Show. I'm so happy to have you on the show. Not only because I've known you even before you were seated at the high seat of power there on Capitol Hill as the congressman for the 6th district in Florida, but while you were here in Washington, D.C., and boy, are you missing some great weather here. I mean, we're having like an ice storm. It's like in the 20s, and I'm seeing the sun shining behind you.
Yeah, come on. I keep telling people, come on down to the Peninsula of Freedom, right?
Oh.
You know, I mean, I just took my daughter to lunch just before coming on with you, and people are out with their surfboards, on their bikes, flip-flops, sandals. I love it. I don't look forward to getting back into the land of dysfunction and ice and snow in Washington, D.C., but
it's an icy swamp. It's an icy swamp, Congressman. It's an icy swamp down here. And you're so needed. So we have to make you come back ever so often to dip your feet into the mud here. And speaking of which, freedom is really existent. I call Florida free, right? Florida free every time someone talks to me about it. And that's one of the subjects that I wanted to talk to you about, because as you know, my opening monologue, I discussed the real serious issues that we're seeing now that we've never seen before really in this country, this way where we've seen senior officials, in our government, former officials from the Obama administration, lawmakers, even like Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House, talking about Americans in a sense like they're terrorists. You were a Green Beret. You served overseas. You went to Afghanistan. You were in Iraq. You've traveled all over the world. You focused on terrorism. I as well traveled into many of those places. What goes across your mind when you hear this kind of rhetoric coming from our lawmakers where they're saying, look, these Americans, these are terrorists. There's domestic terrorism. We have to be more afraid of Americans than we should be of Al Qaeda or ISIS or I want to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, the things, and you've covered this so well, Sarah, the abuses of the FISA court that stands between the average citizen and the powers of the state, the surveillance powers and others. I just can't say loud enough or strong enough how dangerous that is to our republic, that went on in and of itself. Right. And I know you've covered this a lot, but that is the holy grail. That's what sets us apart from all of the rest of the world where I've served and where you've been, in that those are directed at foreigners. Our military is directed at foreigners. Our intelligence agencies are directed at foreigners. And it is a very, very bright line when you have law enforcement that deals with Americans in accordance with the rule of law, in accordance with our courts, with very high evidentiary standards in our entire judicial system. And to see those start to be blended and using terms like terrorists, like domestic terrorists, I firmly believe Antifa is a domestic terrorist, but that is a law enforcement problem. Unless we begin to see foreign powers getting involved. So that kind of blending of a line is a very scary thing. And the surveillance powers, the military powers of the state are meant for our enemies and adversaries, not for Americans. Even misguided extremists or Americans that have bought into extremist ideals, that's a law enforcement problem, not a military and intelligence problem. We can never lose sight of that.
Right. And I think, and what I want people to understand, and for all of you out there that are listening to Congressman Waltz, he really gets this. I mean, he's written books about this. He's advised presidents on these issues with terrorism. He is somebody who really, really understands these issues and is bringing common sense to Congress. That's what I love about him. It's common sense to Congress. And really, seriously,
so
it's just that simple.
Some days I think Afghanistan's easier. I do.
Right.
Washington, D.C. But
I've always said that.
Best.
I've always said that. It's easier to tell the enemy and the friend and the foe. And the enemy always tells you exactly what they want to do. In Afghanistan, they're very clear. We want you out of Afghanistan or we're going to continue to kill you. And that's how we operate. And we want this to be an Islamic state. They're very straightforward. In Washington, you never know who's walking with a knife, right, standing behind your back, right? It's kind of crazy here. Yeah. But one of the things that I wanted to, before we move on to China, because China is why you are here. And I think your resolution is amazing. And I want to ask you lots of questions about why you think why the world should not participate in the Olympics in China. But before we get there, the Biden administration, and I found this fascinating, was basically asking the Director of National Intelligence, the DNI. Now, we have a separation of powers, and this is what Congressman Waltz is talking about, where we have federal law enforcement, our FBI, that deals with national issues. And when they think that there's an American group or a domestic group that could be a threat, it's the FBI that conducts those investigations. And it's very, there's a lot of rules and regulations around that to make sure that the FBI doesn't do what they did to Carter Page, basically spy on him, read all of his, emails, listen to his phone calls, or what they did to James Rosen under the Obama administration, where they were listening to his calls and, his mom and dad's calls. But I found this very interesting, that the Biden administration basically reached out to the DNI. And then I heard Brennan saying, our intelligence agencies are working on expansive measures to ensure that these Americans, these domestic terrorists, will not be a threat. Now we have every time you go to work, I'm sure I want to ask you, what are you worried about? I mean, they have a fence that's 12 feet tall. We've got concertina barbed wire over the top of it. We have still our troops, which I love and I adore. And I think, they have to do this. They have no other choice. They're being called to duty. So I accept them and respect them. But it's we're living in a military state here in Washington, D.C., and we've got this concertina wire. And now we've got, senior officials in the Biden administration reaching out to the DNI. And I'm just what's going on here?
So first, I'm still a serving National Guardsman. I mean, I've been a Green Beret my whole career. I'm still a colonel in the National Guard. And I just want to say as often as I can, that is not your regular military force. They are not sitting around like SEAL Team 6, just ready to go when called. They have businesses. They have civilian jobs. They were pulled out of their lives after a whole year of being mobilized for COVID, being mobilized for social justice. They still have overseas missions. And that's fine. Look, we dealt with January 6th. We had a safe inauguration, and everyone that should be prosecuted should be brought to justice that participated in January 6th. But I've repeatedly asked, what is the threat that is so dire and so big that it demands more soldiers in Capitol Hill than we have in Afghanistan and Iraq combined? And if there is one that is that serious, then the public kind of should know about it. So should Congress. And so should the soldiers standing there, because I walk up and talk to those soldiers all the time, and they have no idea what the threat is. They're told there's some online chatter, but if that is then, the predicate for having a brigade sitting on our Capitol permanently, look, I'm calling it, Sarah, now Fort Pelosi. Because really what this is about political optics for her. And she likes the political optics that they're presenting, but it's not fair to those soldiers. It's wrong. And I'm telling you, as a guardsman, every time you have to go to your employer and go to your family and say, I'm gone again, whether it's for a hurricane or wildfire or this or that, it's going to cause a real retention issue in our force. And I sat in on a hearing yesterday with the Department of Homeland Security, the National Guard, and the Defense Department still cannot articulate what the threat is that has those soldiers there. And then last thing, on this outreach to DNI, the thing we have to watch is how they're defining domestic terrorists. Is that someone that was there to peacefully protest on January 6th? Because I had many, many constituents by the busload, and they came by my office. We prayed. They were there to peacefully make sure that their voice was heard. Is it someone who's attended a rally? Is it someone who's contributed? And it's the most dangerous thing this country can do. And again, what makes our republic different from so many other places around the world is weaponizing those powers and weaponizing those intelligence and surveillance and military powers for political reasons. And I promise you, we're going to block and tackle and fight it at every step.
Oh, thank you so much for that answer, because that's what I was going to ask. What are you going to do about it? And I also want to know, while you're asking them, if you hold a hearing and you get them in front of you, like the folks that made these decisions, whether that be in the FBI, or you're talking in the hall, maybe you stop and see Nancy Pelosi as she's walking through the hall and she wants to talk to you. Can you please ask them if they did this exact same thing? If the FBI did this when like everybody was attacking the White House and when, where they were burning down the church and on the Capitol or in Portland, Oregon, when the cities were in flames, did the FBI ask everybody for bank records? Did they collect information and data? Were they contacting the DNI? I just want to know. I mean, I get it. I get this is the Capitol, but it was also the White House at one point, where there was protests and anger and
absolutely.
Fire
and Sarah,
and destruction.
We'll continue to push. I can promise you, Speaker Pelosi and I are not having ice cream, in the Capitol Lounge and chatting this up. But that's, I'm on Armed Services Committee. I'm on the Science, Space, and Technology Committee. We'll continue to push because I know the right questions to ask, having served in the Pentagon, served downrange, served in the White House, and now in Congress. I know how these things work. I know how they should work anyway. I know how things get hid, as you well know, behind classification. And I promise you, we'll get to the bottom of it.
Well, thank you for that answer. I want to jump right into your piece, which I thought was remarkable. For every one of you out there, if you haven't had a chance to read this, I want you to go to the Washington Examiner. Congressman Michael Waltz did a piece. It's on why basically we should be boycotting the 2022 Winter Olympics in Beijing. You lay out a very, very strong argument. I'm going to play the devil's advocate quickly. And it was a question that we all talked about with our producers. Some of them said Jimmy Carter, had a difficult time and backlash when he boycotted the Olympics. I mean, what do you think's different about that? And I loved how you opened your piece. And I'm going to, and I'll let you answer the question that I first asked, but I loved how you opened your piece with the 1936 Olympics in Berlin. I thought that was pretty brilliant.
Well, yeah. I mean, first, just let me lay out the case and then I'll tell you why it is different than 1980. This call for a boycott of the Olympics, which, by the way, is only 11 months from now. 2022 seems so far away, but it's in February of 22. It didn't come out of the blue. Senator Rick Scott, Newt Gingrich, and literally hundreds of human rights organizations have been demanding that the International Olympic Committee move the Olympics out of Beijing to another location, rebid it to a new city that isn't controlled by a regime that literally has blood on their hands. And that would be the best for our athletes. I think that would be best for the world and for the Olympics itself. However, the IOC has ignored all of those requests. I mean, we have been met with a deafening silence. So at this point, 11 months out, I don't think we have any choice but to call for a boycott. And that's what my resolution calls for. And here's why. Number one, we all know the devastation that the coronavirus has unleashed on this country, on our economy, on our children, and on our health, with over 400,000 Americans dead and counting, 2 million worldwide. And we also know that the Chinese Communist Party covered it up, arrested journalists, arrested doctors that were trying to blow the whistle, wouldn't let the CDC in, took a year to let WHO in, and still didn't give them the data that WHO requested. Number two, there is an active ongoing genocide right now as we speak that I don't think is fully appreciated. There is video being smuggled out of the Uyghur Muslims on their knees, blindfolded, head shaved, being loaded onto rail cars and being shipped into internment camps and concentration camps. Sound familiar from the 1930s?
Right.
Where they are stripped of everything they own, slave labor, forced sterilization campaign against their women, and a mass rape campaign that the BBC just exposed. And what did the Communist Party do? They expelled the BBC from their country. And I could go on. I mean, the stamping out of freedom in Hong Kong, ongoing atrocities into Tibet. I just can't imagine rewarding Xi and the communist regime there with the platform that the Olympics is, with the legitimacy that conveys. And to give them that global voice and megaphone to further their propaganda after all of this. I mean, we literally, I don't know, we'll still be trying to vaccine our population, much less the rest of the world, from what they've released while the Olympics are ongoing. And to your point in 1980, well, number one, Carter was Carter in terms of how he executed things. But, number two, I do think it put a spotlight on the atrocities that were happening in Afghanistan at the time at the hand of the Soviets, where they were literally carpet bombing villages and laying landmines disguised as toys for children.
Landmines that are still there, by the way.
Right.
In some parts of northern Afghanistan, I've actually seen them with my own eyes and walk around them, or in the side of a wall or on the ground. I saw that quite often. I want to play a clip really quick. I want you to watch this, and then I want you to respond. It's just what you were talking about.
Zaya Wooden is reliving a story she can barely bring herself to tell. She was held at one of Xinjiang's so-called re-education camps. These satellite images show the site where Tezanai says she was held, sharing a cell with 13 other women. She's haunted by one image, masked men coming down a camp corridor like this one after midnight.
They were 3 men. Not one, but 3. They did whatever evil their mind could think of. And they didn't spare any part of my body, biting it to the extent that it was disgusting to look at. They didn't just rape. They were barbaric. They had bitten all over my body.
The US have granted her safe refuge after investigating her claims. She's waived her right to anonymity and now feels free to speak out about the full extent of the abuse she says she suffered.
They had an electric baton. I didn't know what it was. It was pushed into my private parts and I was tormented with electric shocks.
It's estimated over 1 million Uyghurs and other Muslims are held in the camps.
I can't even talk when I see that clip. It brings tears to my eyes because I feel like, who are we as a people if we don't stand up for these people's rights, right? If we just think like, and I don't mean to sound like a bleeding heart here or whatever. I know how people are. Oh, it's the Olympics. It's this, it's that. Who wants to boycott? We've had people training for so long. Yeah, but at the expense of what? If the left has pushed this cancel culture, if you can't even say one word without being ostracized, is this not a reason to really say, wait a minute, we have to put a stop to this?
No, well, it's absolutely right. And to your point, we're also calling out the major sponsors of the Olympic Games, where Beijing stands to make billions and they stand to make billions. NBC, Nike, Adidas, Apple, you name it. An Australian think tank just released a report that over 80 international brands are benefiting from the slave labor in Western China. Over 80. So social justice doesn't just apply here to the United States when it's kind of trendy and something they want to get behind. It applies globally. And these atrocities are just brutal, and they will be ongoing while the Olympic Games are happening. I can't imagine, I feel for our athletes. I want the games to be moved somewhere else, but I can't imagine telling them to just turn a blind eye and pretend like it's not happening and choose between their values or being able to compete. And then finally, again, 180 international human rights organizations are calling for the same thing. And finally, Sara, if you take a look at history for a moment, how the Olympics has emboldened some of these authoritarian dictatorships. We all know what happened after the 1936 Olympic Games in Nazi Germany with the invasion of Poland, the rest of Western Europe. In 2000, after the Sochi Games, Putin literally months after the Sochi Games in Russia invaded Crimea and Ukraine. So Lord knows what Z would do next after he gets the global legitimacy and spotlight that comes with a peaceful Olympic Games, and he has that platform for his propaganda.
I absolutely agree with you. And I think that we really have to put into perspective that we do not have the answers we need yet, that the World Health Organization has not been forthright in dealing with China, and neither have a lot of other officials that have dealt with China, even in the scientific community. What's happened to our world, not only to the Uyghurs, but to everyone on this planet that has faced corona. My family went through it, the coronavirus. I have a friend right now who's in the hospital on their deathbed because of this virus. And I hopefully they pull through it. But what's happened is such an atrocity that we have to look at this realistically. We have to be strong enough and bold enough, I believe, like warriors, true warriors. You understand the tip of the spear, in a sense, to not be afraid to tell the truth, to not be afraid to stand up to China and say, you know what? Enough is enough. We have a new president. This new president, President Biden, and our Congress and our Senate need to stand up and say, you know what? Enough is enough. We are not going to take this anymore. And let's find a new place to hold these Olympics so that our athletes can do it without feeling like they are compromising their principles and values.
I would ask them, would you hold the Olympics in Rwanda just after the atrocities there? Would you hold them in Bosnia after Sara Brinka? Right. I mean, This is that level of atrocity that's going on. And the bigger piece is Chairman Xi, the president of China, regularly in speech after speech is talking about replacing the American dream around the world with the China dream, and their ascendancy to prove that their form of government is superior to Western democracy. And this just plays right into their hands. It allows them to whitewash everything that they've done wrong with Corona and gives them a green light to continue their atrocities, whether it's Hong Kong, whether it's with the Uyghurs, or next is Taiwan.
I agree. And now before I let you go, because I hope you're all listening to him, please write your lawmakers. Please let them know how you feel. Please write the Olympic Committee, your Olympic teams. Let them know how you feel. Write Nike, write NBC. Tell them how disappointed you are. This is not just about the Uyghurs. This is a worldwide issue that we all need to be paying attention to, and we need to stand on our principles. And that's why, Congressman Waltz is fighting the good fight and doing the right thing. But before I let you go, I'm going to take you from Earth into space. I'm going to play you a clip. I know you're on the Committee on Space Science and Technology.
I'm a space nerd. That's okay.
Me too.
I'm trying to be the first Green Beret in space. That's one of my goals.
Oh, right? I want to be the first journalist. I'm going to go with you, and I want to cover that story. I have no problem going out there. I'm a nerd too. I love all the sci-fi shows as well. But I'm going to play a good friend of mine, Luis Elizondo. He was former head of what they call unidentified aerial phenomena. They were researching it at the Pentagon. It's still ongoing, the research. There's different things happening. I know you can't talk about all of it. There's been a lot of people briefed, a lot of classified information on what this could be, these UFOs, these unidentified phenomena. I'm going to play you this quick clip, and then I want to get your response and your take on this and what we can do, what Congress can do in order to effort these, these scientific discoveries and move them forward.
Anybody who has if you will, stake in the game. I think we need to have our best and brightest scientists and academics involved.
So we need to have our best and brightest scientists or academics involved. We know that the government's been looking at these unidentified aerial phenomena. They can't explain it. People in our military have seen it. There is a sense of disclosure happening now. And I know Congress within 100 and something days is going to be releasing more documents. Luis Elizondo said he hopes they hold off on that because he wants a full disclosure as much as possible. And Chris Mellon, who was with the Pentagon, is also very open in talking about this. What's your take on this? And what do you think is going to happen? I mean, I know the Senate's involved in it. I mean, do you think we need more research in this area? Do you think we need to understand what we're seeing?
Well, we're going to first better understand what's already there, what we already know, and get those documents released. I mean, that overclassification is a real problem in Washington, and it's the easy button for many in the intelligence and in the defense community. If they can't explain something or don't want to spend resources on it, or it's not a priority, then let's squirrel it away in some compartmented classification. So that way, that's the best way to avoid any tough questions. So that's kind of the focus in the near term on this one is what do we already know? There's people out there that want to run for president just so they can get to Area 51 and get access to to the secret book. I haven't been out there as a member of the Space Committee. It's on my list. So, in the near term, that's what we're going to push for. In the long term, he's actually speaking to a bigger issue, right? In that I am pushing hard for more investment into STEM. We do not have the workforce of the future right now. We're going to be 1 million jobs short in the next 10 years in STEM fields. And right now we're way underrepresented by women, especially, and minorities. And we're pushing the agencies hard as to why that is. Let's not do tokenism. That's not the answer, but understanding and getting people involved at the elementary school level across the board is really where the interest starts. So I agree with them. We need the best and brightest on it. And I want to know, right? It's one of the reasons I'm on the Space Committee.
Oh, absolutely. And we want to stay competitive with China. We don't want China on the dark side of the moon and putting up, special satellites in space and taking up all of our space. There's a lot of issues when it comes to space. That's why we have Space Force. And I try to tell people, they think of Space Force as being kind of like this funny, I love the TV show, by the way. It's really funny. It is the Space Force show on Netflix, but yeah. It's so great. It's so funny, but it's a very serious issue.
No, it's very serious though. The difference between now and, the 1960s is our whole modern economy is dependent. People don't realize it's from agriculture to finance to global real-time logistics, everything. The Chinese know that. They have had more launches last year than the rest of the world combined, including the United States. They do have a rover on the backside of the moon. They do have a satellite circling the moon so that they can speak to that rover, and they're on track to have a manned research station on the moon and their own low Earth orbit space station. They won't participate in ours. It's actually very serious what's going on. Make your jokes about Space Force, space cadets, what have you. But, that's why we jumped all over Jen Psaki when she kind of made a joke of it. Anybody who has received those threat briefs and those intelligence briefs realize how serious it is.
And this is why Congressman Waltz is on the Sara Carter Show. And this is why I've been pushing and pushing and pushing for more research and more focus on issues that deal with space and technology, because it's really the future of mankind. It's the future of our existence. It's the future of ensuring that our children and future generations and that we go on. And that's why people like you, Elon Musk, and others are so adamant about this and the future and the research for mankind. You just can't go wrong here. Thank you so much, Congressman Waltz, for being on the show. I know you've got a ton of interviews lined up. I tell you, I'm going to be right on your side with this, with Beijing. I'm going to be pushing as well. Please, everyone, write your congressional members, write letters to these advertisers and these companies that are putting money into the Olympics in Beijing. Let them know how you feel and stand up on principle. There are people all over the world that are suffering. We're so lucky to live in a country as blessed as ours. We can't lose it. I'm so grateful. I had a chance to ask Michael about the future research as far as unidentified aerial phenomena and UFOs and how important it is. I agree with him to have more young women, more young people in the United States involved in science and the future, and our future in space. I mean, we should not just give this up to China, right? Not give this up to other adversaries like Russia. I mean, we should be at the forefront like we were in the 1960s, at the forefront of space and the space race. And we should understand what's going on in our skies. It is nothing to laugh about. These are very serious issues. We don't have the answers. I think the reason why sometimes we giggle about things like UFOs and UAPs and all of this is because it's kind of scary. We really don't know what it is. You know what else is scary? What else is scary is sometimes Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and what happens around her. It's not just about UFOs. I've got this great story. And before I leave, I need to share it with you because it's so funny. You know, the cancel culture is so out of control, right? We talked about that at the top of the show. This craziness, right? With cancel culture, yet they don't want to boycott the Olympics in China. That's pretty interesting. Want to boycott all of us, but not the Olympics in China. Well, there was this Daily Beast contributing editor, Justin Barragana, and he was accusing Fox News host Tucker Carlson. You guys all heard him earlier. He was accusing Tucker Carlson's team of basically doctoring a photo of Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez from New York, right? He said, look at what they did to her eyes. They made her eyes look big, like big googly eyes is what he used. And he was so mad at Carlson. He had demanded an apology. He had said posting, so it appears that Tucker's producers added googly eyes to AOC in this image, right? I know, shocking. Why would Tucker do that? I mean, what a horrible human being. Guess what? He never doctored the photo. This is so great. Apparently, it was a real photo. So you have this Daily Beast cancel culture guy, contributing editor, Justin Barragana, pushing out there, posting stuff like Tucker's people, they made Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez look like she had googly eyes. That's what he used, googly eyes. But the photo, however, was not doctored, and it appears to be a screenshot of AOC that was actually taken in May 2018. So Barragana tried to delete the post and then admitted hours later that he was wrong. He was so embarrassed. You know, that's like when you get your foot stuck in your mouth. Have you ever done that? Like you're talking to someone. I told everyone here I wasn't going to say it, but now I'm going to share it with you. There was one time I did that when I was very young. I was working at the airport. Yes, I worked for an airline, and I was at, the check-in. It's so terrible. I feel horrible about it. But I have to ask people if they're pregnant, that I need, paperwork from the doctor, especially like if they're 8th or 9th month. Back then, I had to ask that before they could board the flight. And I thought that the woman that came up to me was pregnant, and I felt terrible. Right? I felt terrible. It's like you get your foot stuck in your mouth and you're apologizing and tripping all over yourself and trying to say you're sorry. You feel like you just humiliated yourself, humiliated the person you're talking to. Well, it looks like Barragana humiliated himself right on Twitter in front of everybody. His post, he tried to take it down, but everybody saw it. So I guess AOC has googly eyes in his eyes, right? So I'm going to leave you with that. Don't say anything unless you know for sure, right? That's how we all get caught up in this mess of a crazy world and have to explain ourselves. I've done it. You've done it. I just think it's funny that when they try to cancel culture everybody and they get caught doing it, they try to hide from it, right? We're not going to let them hide. We're calling them out on it. And AOC, you got fine eyes, a little googly, but fine nonetheless. You bring me a lot of laughs. Anyways, thank you so much for being a part of the Sara Carter Show. I'm so glad you were with us. Remember, you can follow us on Twitter at Sara Carter DC. Go to my website, saraacarter.com, to get all of the latest stories. You can get them right there. And you can also sign up for our email. Don't forget to do that, folks. You've got to do that because there is so much craziness with this cancel culture. Look at what happened to Parler. Look at what happened, to folks on Twitter that have been banned, including the president of the United States, Donald Trump, our former president, banned from Twitter, banned from Facebook, all of this craziness. So please sign up for our email list there, and we will always stay in touch with you. I promise. We will always give you the latest stories, and you'll find our podcast there as well. Again, thank you so much for being a part of the Sara Carter Show. Love y'all. God bless. Today, I'm joined by Rebecca Weber, the CEO of the Association for Mature American Citizens, also known as AMAC. For the upcoming year, what are some of the biggest topics of advocacy for members?
As an organization that represents Americans 50 and over, we recognize that Social Security is such an important component to seniors' income. And so we also recognize that for someone my age, for example, Social Security, I may not see my entire benefit unless something is done soon. So we promise to fight to keep Social Security solvent. We've got what's called the AMAC Social Security Guarantee. Information is found on our website. We're also pushing for transparency in healthcare. We want to eliminate surprise billing. Sara, another great proposal that we have out there, which has got over 22 co-sponsors now, is AMAC's pro bono healthcare bill, which essentially allows doctors to take a healthcare deduction and provide doctor services to individuals that are currently on Medicaid. We project that it could save billions of dollars in Medicaid, but also it provides for those lower income folks to have and build a real doctor-patient relationship.
Rebecca, thanks so much for being with me today. I'm honored to have you and AMAC as a sponsor for the Sara Carter Show. For more information, folks, visit amac.us/Carter.